Let's talk a little college football with our next guest, Joe Broback. He returns to the Sons of UCF Live. We had him on last year. He's out with a 309-page preview of college football. He covers college football for Pro Football Network. Joe, welcome back in to Sons Live.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
I don't know if you caught that. We were talking about the DraftKings odds, 9 wins, over under for Cincinnati Houston, who you have in your guide ahead of UCF. Help us understand what you see. Let's start with the Cougars.
Well, I think you look at Houston returns, they return a lot of the talent that brought them to the conference championship last year. And that, Clayton Tune is probably the biggest reason for that, along with Tank Dell. That passing attack is going to be fun to watch. Now, as we've seen the last week, UCF also added some potential talent in their passing attack as well. But Houston's defense is also extremely talented. They've been able to take steps forward under Doug Belk, and they have an extremely explosive defensive line that's going to be a problem for a lot of teams. And I think they have an underrated secondary, even though they lost quite a bit of talent. They still have quite a few guys that are going to bring them probably back to that conference championship game. Cincinnati is, I think them and UCF, you have to kind of put maybe on the same level, obviously for ranking purposes. I had to pick one to be 2, one to pick 3. I just like the direction that Luke Fickell has this program going. I think that he's solid. And I think that when you're looking at, the talent they're bringing in, there's a lot to be excited about. Even with all of the losses they incur this year, the defense is still going to be loaded. The offense obviously has to find a quarterback, but with the recruiting that they've been doing and Luke Fickell still somehow at Cincinnati, it's kind of hard to count them out right now.
Joe, obviously, kudos, first of all, on putting together 300 plus pages on college football. That's quite a tough task. And so I'm sure you have a lot of work to do, a lot of research. So when you researched and you kind of, surmised around UCF, what did you see about UCF that you liked? And what did you see with UCF that kind of leaves you as a question mark?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of research that goes into it, especially as I'm sure you guys know, the transfer portal is just this whole monster that causes a lot of changes and delays when you're writing a preview like this. I think I just like that Gus has this program and going in a different direction than Josh Heupel. It's not necessarily, I'm not going to get into the debate of Heupel versus Malzahn. I just like the direction that Malzahn is bringing them. He's, bringing guys in that fit his system, fit what he wants to do, fit his culture. And that's something that I really, really like. A guy that I'm really high on is John Rice Plumlee. I think that he is going to be a star for UCF. He fits Gus Malzahn's system perfectly in terms of what you're looking for. And I just like the explosive talent that's returning, even with some of the losses that they've sustained. There's still a lot to like about this program. Now, the concerns obviously are going to be, last year the offense wasn't as explosive, especially at the quarterback position, but that was to be expected, especially after Dylan Gabriel goes down. It's just a different look and it's going to be a different feel. What do they do to respond to that? They have the talent there. There's no doubt. We've seen what this team has been able to do. We've seen what the coaching staff's been able to bring in, and we know that they have the talent to do it. It's just, can they translate that to the field? Are they still a young team that's maybe relying on transfers to do a little bit too much? Is it too early for them to arrive back in the AAC? I don't think so. I think that they should be competing for a conference championship, but I think that there are still some steps that need to be made before we can just assume that they're going to be at the top.
You have Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF as 3 of the top 4 G5 teams coming into the year. And we know they're the best teams in this conference. They're going to move to the Big 12. Where does that leave the AAC as a conference among the other G5 conferences?
When I first heard that Cincinnati, UCF, and Houston were going to leave, I was a little bit concerned. Might have been a little bit of an overreaction, but I think now that I sit back and actually look at what this conference looks like, I don't think that really was much of an overreaction at all. I think if anything, new teams will just rise to the top. I really like what SMU has been doing. Sonny Dykes is gone, but I think Rhett Lashley is going to continue that success. Memphis, I think their fans maybe think they're a little bit better than they are right now, but I like what Ryan Silverfield is doing. USF under Jeff Scott. UCF fans probably don't want to hear this, but I really like what he's doing in terms of bringing in talent and kind of changing the culture to rebuild USF to what it once was. I just don't see the quality at the top or maybe the depth overall with those 3 teams leaving. And I think that teams like SMU and Memphis are also trying to look to leave because the teams that they're going to bring in just aren't going to be good replacements for Houston, Cincinnati, UCF. They're just not at the level of those three teams. So I think it eventually will take a step back because those are three big losses. But there are still a couple teams I think I like that will remain. It's just a matter of, are they going to stick around or are they going to try to leave as well?
Who's a team we're not thinking much about that could surprise, cause some problems in the AAC this coming season?
My pick, I think for the last 3 years, I've been high on ECU. That's probably my biggest flaw is that I really like Holton Ahlers, the quarterback for ECU. I think he has a really high ceiling, maybe the highest ceiling of anybody in this conference. But I also think that his floor is so low, which is an unfortunate roller coaster that Pirates fans have had to endure. If you look at 2 years ago, he threw for 535 yards and 6 touchdowns against Cincinnati. And that was one of the best Cincinnati secondaries that we've ever seen in this conference. And I think that you have the talent with Mike Houston's squad that they can be a contender, but it just comes down to consistency. The defense has some holes that need to be filled, and consistency on that side of the ball has been a big issue. But Houston is a guy who's going to bring the talent in to kind of raise that floor. And it just comes down to how high can their ceiling be. So I think if you're looking a team that could surprise at the top, it's ECU. And then I think you have to pick USF as another one. I just like I said, I like what Jeff Scott is doing. I like the talent he's bringing in, the culture that he's establishing. And he's doing more of a long-term build. Now he is bringing a lot of transfers in, but he's still getting talent at the high school level that's going to help them build towards the long run. So I think that they probably won't be contending for a conference championship, but they can pull off a couple upsets maybe here and there.
Joe, as part of your analysis, you also do essentially position reviews and you sort of rank the top players at each position. So I have a couple that I want to kind of call out specifically that kind of raised my eyebrow. Number one, you had Kamor Gamble transfer from Florida as the number 19 tight end. What do you like about Kamor Gamble? Why do you think he's going to be such an impact for the Knights this year?
I think his pass catching ability is probably what sets him apart. I don't think we've seen the quality of play since Jordan Atkins left from UCF. And I think that Gamble brings that pass catching ability, that explosive playmaking ability to the passing attack. Now, they've added a ton of players that I'm excited about. Kobe Hedson is one I think UCF fans are really going to like, paired up with Ryan O'Keefe. And obviously they just added Javon Baker. But Kamari Gamble is that tight end that he plays tight end, but he's a guy who can be extremely explosive as a pass catcher and almost kind of make you forget that he's a tight end because he plays almost like a receiver.
His other name is Isaiah Bowser. You have him listed as your number 14 running back, but you also put him on the first team all AAC. So kind of two different rankings for him there. Where do you see, and is that, I guess, a function of maybe you want to see more consistency out of Bowser this year? Where are you at with Isaiah Bowser?
Well, I think that when you look at running backs in college football this year, there's so many that it's really kind of hard to, I don't think there's a big difference between number 14 at Isaiah Bowser and maybe number 3 or number 4. I don't think there's a big gap between those two. I think that just has to speak to the talent and the depth at the running back position in college football and the group of 5. You look at even Appalachian State with Cameron Peoples and Nate Noel. Those are two talented running backs. They're on the same team. I think the biggest thing is that Bowser also has Johnny Richardson. And then, as UCF fans have reminded me, they have a ton of talent and depth behind them. So it comes down to really just touches. I think it's hard to put rankings. Obviously, Bowser is one of the most talented running backs in college football. It just comes down to, is he going to get enough touches to show that he is that? I think that if you're looking from a purely evaluation, a film standpoint, he definitely has what it takes to be one of the best. It's just going to come down to, is he going to get enough touches? I think in Malzahn's offense, he's going to, but it's just a matter of, can he produce at the level that those other guys are going to that have the same talent as him?
Cincinnati made history last year. They make it to college football playoff. Is there any G5 with their out-of-conference schedule? Can Houston, if they go run the table, UCF with their schedule, any chance they can make the playoff? And if not, is the winner of the American automatically the NY6 team, or is there another school we need to look out for?
Honestly, I think that I tweeted this out earlier this week, and Dana Holgerson made a statement that they're on track to do what Cincinnati did and make the college football playoff. When you look at their schedule, it's, a lot had to happen last year for Cincinnati to make the college football playoff. Now they did beat Notre Dame. That was a big win for them, but Houston doesn't have a Notre Dame on their schedule. They just don't. UTSA is not going to be the same. Texas Tech is not a Notre Dame. Like, they just don't have the same caliber of non-conference schedule to put them in the playoff, even if a lot of things happen. I think more has to happen if Houston's going to get in there. The only team that maybe could do it is San Diego State. Has kind of a tough schedule. But really, like, when you look at teams that have like elite, Utah State as Alabama, like, that's not going to happen. So, at a certain point, you kind of have to be realistic and realize that there's probably not anybody that has both the schedule and the talent to run the table. In terms of who's going to win the NY6, I mean, it's pretty much been the AAC. It's been kind of a domination by that conference. I think the Mountain West is closer than people realize to the AAC. It's just that the AAC has been that good. I think it's going to be one of the Houston, Cincinnati, UCF. If you're looking at the Mountain West, people really like Boise State. I think they'll have a bounce back year. Utah State was good last year. Can't really count a Blake Anderson team out. San Diego State is tough, but again, that non-conference schedule is going to be kind of a rough one for them. So if they do run the table, then we have a serious conversation to have, but I don't really foresee that happening. I think that when you look at just the rest of the conferences, Appalachian State is another one you could look at. Coastal Carolina loses quite a few pieces, so I don't think that they're necessarily in there. The MAC just isn't as talented as either of those three conferences. And Conference USA, I mean, UTSA could be. I think that their saving grace with the MAC and Conference USA is that those conferences aren't as talented as those other three. So maybe if those three conferences beat up on each other and then you have a UTSA that goes undefeated, then they'll sneak past one of those teams. But I think that as long as you have maybe a 1 or maybe a 2-loss team at worst in one of those three conferences, it's going to be probably the AAC and then Mountain West after that.
As UCF fans well know, Navy is a tough game year in and year out. But you got to wonder now with the transfer portal era, NIL, this does not help a Navy or a service academy. There's got to be erosion for a program that is competitive year in and year out like Navy.
I think that the fact that they're running triple option is always going to be something that makes life difficult for anybody, because when you face a triple option team, as any coaching staff will tell you, it's a different level of preparation. It's a different week for your team. And when you're forced to play with better discipline, you have to do your responsibility. And yes, there's probably not the talent that's going to go to a Navy, but I guarantee you that nobody knew Keenan Reynolds' name before he went to Navy. Will Worth, the quarterback that used to be there as well. Like, you didn't know these names coming into the season. So, they have taken a step back, but I think that their advantage is that they play an offense that nobody really sees. And if you don't have a disciplined team, it doesn't really matter how talented you are, because Navy can carve up anybody. And you look at triple option teams in general. I mean, just it feels like recently we were looking at Alabama struggling with triple option teams. You look at Florida lost to the Swamp to Georgia Southern when they were running the triple option. So the triple option, no matter the talent gap or anything like that, is going to be an advantage for that team. It's going to make life difficult for anybody facing them. So even though Navy's not getting the talent that a UCF, a Houston, or Cincinnati is getting, their advantage is that they run an offense that requires you to play at your best no matter how good you are.
All right, Joe, you do a lot of lists, you do a lot of rankings. Obviously, a lot of time goes into figuring this out. One ranking I did not see in your publication is the top NIL programs. And so we joke about NIL a lot, right? It's obviously been a thing. We saw Jimbo and Nick go back and forth. We obviously, as fans, as people who cover a team specifically, we probably have a much more emotional attachment. You get to see a much broader review of it, right? So when you're looking school to school, when you're looking across the landscape, can you see an impact that NIL has had as you're looking and evaluating from school to school? Or is it simply just us as a small fan base and small fan bases just yelling into the wind?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think when you look at, it's really kind of the Wild West right now. It's more of a pay for play. But I think that those people who are complaining about it right now don't realize that like it's not going to be perfect. You don't just make a change and everybody's like, oh yeah, this is great. This works that way. It just doesn't happen like that. So I think that you're looking at my biggest concern, I think, is that you're seeing the Alabamas. I mean, Texas A&M just had their best class ever, the best class in college football history, according to 24/7 Sports. So I think that it's kind of a relative unknown right now. And I understand the frustrations for a smaller school compared to in Alabama, the Ohio States, those kind of schools, because they have more money. And I think a lot of people are seeing that the rich are getting richer, but there are ways to combat that. And I mean, in the end, it could be a good thing for the smaller schools because I think one of the complaints about the NFL is that you have these players making so much money that they just play for the money. And that tends to have different results or volatile results where you could be really good, but you also could get distracted. And maybe that creates some more parity in college football. That's something I'm very curious to see. Are the teams that are getting the most money, is that causing some rifts in the locker room? Are people envious that Bryce Young is getting millions of dollars when this incoming freshman who thinks that he's just as good isn't getting that money? How does that affect those players now that they actually can receive extra money? Because before it was everybody who's on a full ride gets the same thing. And now, yeah, you can say they were giving money under the table, but at face value, you're seeing you go from everybody has the same thing to now everybody can see this person is here, this other person is below them, and so on. So I'm curious to see how that affects programs and this, the coaching staffs, that especially the head coaches that are getting a little bit older. Are they just trying to save their career until they get to the end? Like Nick Saban can't coach forever, so he's obviously embracing what he can, but is he just headed out because he doesn't know how he's going to handle that? And does that mean that a door is open for a new kind of coach, like maybe a Luke Fickell or even Gus Malzahn, to kind of step in and say, hey, if you guys want to embrace this new future for college football, you need to come to our program. We're going to help you get to where you need to go. And does that change, like I said, the parity and who's going to be really good at the top of college football?
We lost Mike.
We did lose Mike. Yeah.
We did lose Mike. Joe, how long does it take you to put this together? Is this just ongoing from when the season ends? 309 pages. I mean, this is a labor of love here.
You don't believe I do it in 24 hours?
I do not.
Oh man, I wish. No, so I think the hardest part is I don't know, maybe this is just how much I love college football, or maybe I got bored last year, but I started this in November, which is the earliest that I started it. But obviously, it takes quite a bit of time to get the layout. I'd like to change things up. I don't like to use the same design in terms of, I like to kind of change it up. I don't want to get set in my ways and do the same format over and over. Now I do have, I do depth charts and writings that I do, or rankings and lists that are the same, but I try to switch things up a little bit. So it starts with about a month or two of kind of trying to decide what the layout's going to look out like. And obviously that I'm paying attention to games from 2021. And then once the season ends, taking a look at the transfer portal, which is, a 5-month process. I mean, even if you look in this guide, there are some names that aren't on the team because they hit the transfer portal, or they added some guys that I haven't updated with my limited resources. But, it's an ongoing process for the transfer portal. But some guys you pretty much know, like who's going to start. Bryce Young was probably the easiest one to pick. With UCF, it was a little tougher because I thought Mikey Keene was going to be the guy, and then they add Plumlee, and so I think it's about a 6-7 month process to get this all finalized, and then at a certain point, I just have to make a cutoff and get it ready to publish. So it's quite a process, but honestly, it doesn't feel like it to me because I love doing it so much, and it's just fun to see the response of people who are just as excited for college football as I am.
And tell folks where they can find it. Again, 309 pages, all free.
Yeah, you can go to my Twitter page. That's at Joe Broback. It's the pinned tweet, so you really can't miss it. There's a Power 5 cover and there's a Group of 5 cover for those who are interested. And so you can click on whatever one. It's the same thing. The cover is just different. But head over to Twitter is where you're going to find that.
Joe Broback, we appreciate you stopping by Suns Live, and thanks for all the good work you do in putting together that guide.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.